السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. Indeed, all thanks is to Allah. We seek refuge in Him and we seek His forgiveness. Seek refuge in Allah from the evil of our own selves and the evil of our actions. For indeed, whomever Allah has guided, no one can misguide, and whoever Allah misguides, no one can guide. And I stand before you and I testify openly that there is no God except Allah Azza wa Jalla. And I stand before you and I testify openly that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the last and final messenger. O you who believe, be God conscious of Allah, fear Allah as His due, as is His due, and do not die except in the state of Islam. Be God conscious of the Lord who created you from one soul, and from that so many men and many women, and fear Allah, and you ask one another, indeed, Allah is ever over you, an observer and a watcher. We are gathered here today about a week after Ramadan. And although last week was a day of Eid, a day of celebration, a day of drinking, and a day of eating, today is also a celebration. For it was in a Sahih Hadith by the Messenger of Allah ﷺ that he said, verily Allah has made this day of Friday a celebration for the Muslims. Now why are we celebrating today? Why is today a celebration? We celebrate not only the fact that Allah has enabled us to live to see another Friday, but we celebrate and we rejoice the mercy that Allah has bestowed upon us. الصلوات الخمس والجمعة إلى الجمعة ورمضان إلى رمضان مكفرات ما بينهن إذا اجتنبت الكبائر. That the 5 daily prayers from one Jum'ah to the next Jum'ah, from one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, is an expiation of sins committed between the two, so long as the major sins are avoided. Now let's think about this, because sometimes we sin and we don't even know that we're sinning, or sometimes we sin and we disregard the sin as something insignificant. But by the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal, that He has bestowed upon us, just by merely doing the things that we're supposed to be doing and staying away from the things that we're supposed to stay away from, it is a kafara, it is an expiation. By just practicing your 5 pillars, the basics of Islam, it is an expiation. And when he came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and Bedouins at that time were very bold in their speech, very strong in their heart. Their character was very bold. So he comes to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, tell me what Allah has obligated on me from prayer. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, he says the 5 prayers except that you volunteer to do more. And then he says, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, tell me what Allah has obligated on me from fasting. And the Prophet Muhammad he says, Ramadan, except that you volunteer to do more. And then the Bedouin, he says, Ya Rasulullah, tell me what Allah has obligated on me from giving of zakat. And so the Messenger of Allah, he tells him the laws of Islam. And then the man, he says so boldly, لا أتطوع شيئا ولا أنقص شيئا مما فرض الله عليه. That I won't volunteer any more, nor will I subtract from what was obligated on me. And then he stood up and left. And the Prophet ﷺ, who was sitting with the companions around him, he said, أفلح إن صدق. كما قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, أو دخل الجنة إن صدق. That if he is truthful about what he says, he will be successful. Or if he is truthful about what he says, he will be amongst the people of paradise. All this man cared about was the 5 pillars of Islam. He didn't care about praying the night. He didn't care about fasting Mondays and Thursdays. All he cared about was the basics of Islam. Nothing more, nothing less. and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ gave them glad tidings. Now, as we exit Ramadan, if you don't feel some type of spiritual revelation or spiritual inclination, don't worry. The whole point of Ramadan, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you may attain God consciousness, that you do what you're supposed to do, and you stay away from what you're supposed to stay away from. That in itself is a sign that Allah has accepted your Ramadan. Ramadan gave us that spiritual boost, and now that spiritual boost is gone. And the companions at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they also felt this spiritual boost at certain times and spiritual declination at other times. And the Sahabi by the name of Abdul ibn Rabi'ah, he says, he came to the Prophet Muhammad complaining because he also felt this spiritual inclination and the spiritual decline. He said, Ya Rasulullah, when we're with you, you remind us of hellfire and paradise as if we see it with our eyes. And then when we go back to our wives and our children and our business, we forget much of that. And the Prophet Muhammad, he said, by him in whose hand is my soul, if your state of mind remains the same as it is in my presence, and you always were remembering Allah, the angels will shake your hands in your beds and in your paths. But hadara sa'a wa sa'a. Hadara, an hour and an hour. That is, you devote some time. You devote time to prayer and meditation and dhikr of Allah, and you devote time to this worldly life. That you're not too focused on one or you're too focused on another. There's a balance. A balance in the way you conduct your spiritual life and this worldly life. The spiritual boost of Ramadan is gone. Yes, that was you standing in prayer. That was you standing the nights. Yes, that was you fasting during the days of Ramadan. But just because you fasted Ramadan doesn't mean you're out of the game of this dunya. Doesn't mean that you will never fall into sin. For it was on the narration of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu that he narrated the Messenger of Allah said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِ بِيَدِهِ لَوْ لَمْ تُذْنِبُوا لَذَهَبَ اللَّهُ بِكُمْ وَلَجَاءَ بِقَوْمٍ يُذْنِبُونَ فَيَسْتَغْفِرُونَ اللَّهَ فَيَغْفِرُ لَهُمْ. He said, by him in whose hand is my life, if you were not to commit sin, Allah would sweep you out of existence, replace you with people who sinned, so that they would ask Allah for forgiveness, so that He would forgive them. Allahu Akbar. Now, as I'm telling you this, in no shape, way, or form am I endorsing sin. Because the point of the hadith is not for you to hear this hadith so that you can plan to sin, so that you can plan to ask Allah for forgiveness afterwards. Rather, it is so that when you fall into sin, you know that Allah is Ghafur Rahim. And you know that the whole point of us dealing with this life, to go out into this world, is that when we sin, the whole point is to ask Allah for forgiveness afterwards. It's not about the sin itself, it's about what you do afterwards. Did you ask Allah for forgiveness? Or did you stay ignorant? I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me and forgive all of you. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. My dear brothers and sisters, we're in a time where the shayateen are no longer locked up, where we are no longer gathered for Taraweeh every night. where we are no longer fasting every single day. And Allah describes to us Ramadan as ayyam ma'dudat, counted days. And when we think of counted days, we think of a short period of time. When in reality, our life is ayyam ma'dudat. Our life is counted days. We need to wake up because the clock is ticking. Who here can tell me or guarantee me how long they're going to live? No one. Are you going to live 30 years? Are you going to live 30 days? Are you going to live 30 minutes? Are you going to live 30 seconds? We need to start implementing into our lives, realizing that our lives are counted days, just like Ramadan, applying the same concept. Nothing changed. We need to apply this in the same manner. My dear brothers and sisters, just because Ramadan is gone does not mean we close up the Quran. Why is it that Ummah Iqra la taqra? Why is it that the reading nation does not read? The first verse sent to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to humanity, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read. Why is it that we close in the Quran after Ramadan? No one told you that you have to memorize all 30 ajza. No one told you that you had to memorize cover to cover. The sole purpose of the Quran was not so that you memorize it. And yes, that is an encouraged act. But if it was the sole purpose, Allah would have made it an obligation. Rather, the purpose of the Quran is so that you implement it into your lives. Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he says that someone who understood the Quran and he has implemented the Quran in his life, that he is from the people of the Quran. And he says vice versa. Rather, the person who memorizes the Quran, even if he reads it with tajweed, but he does not implement the Quran into his life, he is not from the people of the Quran. My dear brothers and sisters, in the Quran, Allah tells us to leave off your business, leave off your trade, leave off your job to come to Jum'ah. Are we implementing the Quran into our lives, or is it just a verse that we hear and read? In the Quran, when Allah says that those who engage in interest in the riba have waged war with Allah, are we implementing the Quran into our lives, or are we saying that 1% is not that much of ayat? It's time that we implement the Quran into our lives. My dear brothers and sisters, just because Ramadan is over does not mean that we stop coming to the masajid. There were two brothers, they were talking, and one brother said to the other, he said, the masjid is empty after Ramadan. And the other brother, he said so wisely, he said, the masjid has guests and it has family. The guests have left and the family have stayed and remained. We need to ask ourselves, are we a guest to the masjid? Are we from the musallin, the people who pray, who establish prayer in the masjid? Does the masjid see us every day? Even if it's just for one salah, even if it's just for fajr, even if you come to the masjid once a day for the prayer of Isha, is the masjid seeing you every day? Or is the masjid seeing you every week? Is the masjid seeing you every Friday? It's time that we implement the Quran into our lives. It's time that the masjid does not see, that the masjid sees us every week, every day, not just every week, not just every Ramadan. It is time that we implement and we act and we see our lives as ayyam ma'dudat. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us from the people of the masajid, to make us from the people of the Quran. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us our Ramadan, our fasting, our standing, our giving. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا إنك جامع الناس يوم لا ريب فيه إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. فاذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفروه يغفر لكم واتقوه يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا. أقم الصلاة.